For today's video, I'm going to be using JRB stencils and some drop cloth. We're going to show you how to stencil fabric using it for chairs and throw pillows. We have a full video on how to upholster chairs, but I just wanted to quickly go over what I'm doing here today. We've got brand new foam on the bottom that we've sprayed to the base of our chair. We had to cut these out because ours were missing. We've got a layer of batting to smooth out the edges, and then we've got a clean, washed and bleached drop cloth. The drop cloth is from Home Depot. You can pick them up at Home Depot, Walmart. I don't like the cheapest ones, but I also don't like the heavy duty. Medium weight is usually the best.
Now for the fun part, making sure they're straight on the chair.
You're probably wondering, why are we doing this after they've been upholstered? I find that it's really hard to get them nice and centered. When you're pulling the fabric, it tends to pucker in a few places or get pulled one direction more than the other. So I just take the risk of upholstering it first, and then I tape it down before I'm ready to stencil.
So I use the two little tack strips to kind of position it where I want it and hold it there. And then now I'm taping all the way around the edge. That way we don't have any oopsies off the side.
While Zeb is taping, I'm gonna go ahead and pour some of the paint out that we're gonna be using. It doesn't take very much paint. I'm using DIY paint in Little Black Dress, and I'm just gonna pour a little bit on this mat. We get these mats at IKEA. They're like 2 for $1.99, I believe. Really any silicone mat would work, or paper plate. We just like these because they're washable. So we're using the Kroger and American Mill stencils. We've got our little C stencil brushes. Any stencil brush will work as long as it's really like stiff and packed together. These are my favorite, and they last a really long time. You can pick up these stencils, products we're using today, at JamiRayVintage.com.
So when you're stenciling, especially on fabric, you don't want bleed through underneath the stencil, so get as much paint off as you can. If you feel like it's too dry, it's probably about right.
You're gonna take your stencil brush and you're just gonna go up and down and pounce it in. You may have to make a few passes because your brush is so dry, but it's better to make a few passes than to have too much paint.
All right, so, you know, I got a little crazy. It's still wet, so it wipes off pretty easily. You can sand this drop cloth and it does pretty cool stuff. All right.
Okay, ready, set, go. All right, mine's a little blurry. Yours is a little bit better. You can see Zeb's is neater than mine because he's slower and more patient. I went a little juicy. I've got some bleed through situations. However, if you look at authentic grain sacks, they have mistakes because they're all stenciled on, so we're good. I'm gonna sand that when it's dry.
We'll let them dry here for a bit, and then we'll show you how to heat set them so that they stay on there forever. So Jami wants to do horizontal stripes. These are gonna be pretty organic. We're just eyeballing this. If you're really worried about it, you could measure everything out, but our fabric isn't even completely square, so.
Well, the easiest way to find the center is to fold it in half like that. I just need a little piece as a guide. So I'll put this here, and then I'll put a strip here, and then I'll rip this off. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take in this stripe here, I'm going to come across and actually tape it to my countertop. I just take my centerpiece and tape this edge so I don't get paint all over my counter. You might get some that seeps through, but this DIY washes off. And if you don't go all the way to the edge, that's fine because we're gonna have a seam for sewing. Or you could get real fancy and do a fat stripe and a skinny stripe and a skinny stripe. We're using Farm Fresh. This is another DIY paint color. It's clay base. It's heavily pigmented, so it almost like dyes the fabric. And you want to make sure before you do this that you've sealed those edges down so that fabric, that masking tape is super tight. because we're not using a stencil brush, we're brushing it on. So if it's not tight, it will leak under the edge.
Which is still okay.
Yeah. Is it though? I don't know.
It's okay by me.
One coat is more than enough of this.
Yep.
It soaks right in. I like to use drop cloth because it is so porous and it does accept the paint. Careful when you're ripping this off that you don't get the tape that has the paint on it touching your fabric. If you're concerned about that, wait till it's all the way dry. All right. Get a nice straight stripe.
All right, so we've got 220 grit sandpaper. The paint, now that it's dry, is a little crunchy on here. We're just gonna soften that back up and maybe blur some of those lines. The DIY paint is heavily pigmented, so it's gonna drag some of the gray and dark and give it kind of a nice weathered look. And then we're also gonna take the air gun and blow that out so that some of that pigment isn't all where we don't want it to be. If you didn't want to do this sanding step and you don't have an air compressor to blow off the extra pigment and to kind of get that nice and uniform, what you could do is just leave it. It will soften up after being sat on a few times. You could also use a vacuum to vacuum some of this pigment out if you wanted to try distressing it and you don't have an air compressor to spray it out.
Okay, so the next set is gonna be heat setting. We're gonna do the same thing on the pillows. You're gonna wanna set your iron as hot as you need for the fabric that you're using. In this case, I usually turn it all the way up. Make sure that there's no steam because you don't wanna get it wet and reactivate that paint. I'm gonna come across and iron it about 20 seconds in each area just to heat set that. Okay, so take 2. We are going to be stenciling over the top of our grain sack. Now, if you're concerned about powdering with the DIY paint and you want it nice and crisp, you could also do the exact same thing with Sweet Pickins milk paint. No extra bond required, and we'll drop a link to that below. Oh, this one's much better.
It's because it's on the thing.
Well, so what did we learn?
Well, we already knew, but like, because you're always scared of being able to get them straight when you upholster.
So next time you stencil on a hard surface instead of on the fabric, it's much crisper. I'm not even gonna distress this because I don't wanna mess around. Okay, so disclaimer, I'm not a seamstress. I don't like using straight pins. I feel like this fabric sticks to itself pretty well, so I never really worry about it. If you're concerned, you can put straight pins, make it nice and neat. I'm just gonna sew it. I like to do a triple stitch that holds it in place. I start at the bottom of the pillow and then come around to here. And then I will flip it right side out, stuff it, and then I actually use Gorilla hot glue, high temp hot glue, instead of whip stitching the edge. Okay, so I've snipped the edges so that way the corners will lay flat. I'm just gonna flip this right side out so it's ready to stuff.
Jamie's gonna keep sewing that other one. I am gonna stuff this full, like overstuff it.
I don't know if I left the hole big enough for your giant paw.
You kinda didn't. I can get my hand in here with like just my...
I left enough room for me.
I'm gonna get it as good as I can and we'll see.
All right, I'm gonna start sewing. So you're gonna fold the fabric in like this, so that way you've got a lip to hot glue it on. And you're gonna just kind of open it up. Make sure you pull the strings tight where you stopped sewing, that's important. You're gonna run a bead of hot glue across this part where it's folded over, and you're just gonna do a little bit at a time. smush it together. When it's dry, if you have a little lip that's not quite close enough, you can add just a little bit more hot glue. I like to wait till I'm all the way done to decide that. And this is the side that's gonna go down anyway, so you're not really gonna see it. That's why you always wanna make sure you leave your hole open on the bottom. If you know how to whip stitch, or do a hidden stitch, or whatever it is that it's called, you could do that too. But I can't ever make it look good, so. You get a little too much, wait till it's cooled off a little bit. Let's see. Then wipe it off. Don't want to burn your fingers. You can also use a little like silicone finger cubby thing. Okay, so once it's on there, you're gonna take the fabric. See how it's kind of puckered? And you're just gonna pull it just a little bit. So that way it's nice and flat. And you're good to go.
So this was the original pillow that we did like this. It is hot glued and it has been through the washer, which Jami does not recommend, but it has been and survived. This pillow is 4 years old.
So all you people over there that are saying, I can't believe she hot glued the pillows. It works. If you can whip stitch or do an invisible stitch, I'm sure you can Google it and find great videos, but if you're not into that and you don't mind losing a few fingerprints along the way, hot glue is definitely the way to go.
Yep.
If you don't want to sew at all, you can stop by IKEA or Hobby Lobby. They have some great options, about $5 or under. I think this one was $2.50 because it was half off. Totally work well. The only trick with these is to put cardboard inside so that way that paint doesn't soak through to the back.
So if you're good about lining things up when you're doing your upholstery, if you do the stencil on a hard surface, you will get a crisper image. But if you're worried about having it perfectly centered, it does work pretty well to just go over the top of the foam.
There's pluses and minuses. You guys can learn from our mistakes and make your own decisions. Go to JamiRayVintage.com if you want to achieve this look on your projects. We've got the stencils and the paint there. Be sure to give us a thumbs up and subscribe to Jami Ray Vintage for more
DIY.
Hit the subscribe button.